Mrs. Collins had always been a dedicated teacher. She loved her job and cared deeply for her students. One chilly November morning, she noticed that one of her students, Emily, seemed unusually quiet and withdrawn. Emily was a bright girl, always eager to participate in class, but today she looked troubled. Mrs. Collins decided to speak with Emily after class. "Emily, is everything okay?" she asked gently. Emily hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Collins. Everything's fine." But Mrs. Collins could see the sadness in her eyes. She knew something was wrong. "If you ever need to talk, I'm here for you," she said kindly. Emily gave a small smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Collins." Over the next few days, Mrs. Collins noticed that Emily's clothes were getting more worn and her lunchbox often seemed empty. She started to worry about her well-being. Mrs. Collins decided to discreetly find out more about Emily's situation. She spoke with other teachers and the school counselor, and they confirmed her suspicions. Emily's family was struggling financially. Mrs. Collins knew she had to do something. She couldn't bear to see one of her students suffer. So, she decided to take action. She gathered some extra school supplies, clothes, and food items from her home and brought them to school the next day. During lunch, she called Emily to her desk. "Emily, I have something for you," Mrs. Collins said, handing her a bag filled with the items. "I hope this helps a little." Emily's eyes widened in surprise. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Collins," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. But it was what happened next that took Mrs. Collins by complete surprise. As the final bell rang and students started to leave, Mrs. Collins noticed a sleek black car pull up to the school entrance. To her astonishment, a well-dressed man stepped out of the car and walked towards the school. Who could that be? She wondered, her curiosity piqued. Mrs. Collins watched as the man approached the front of the school. Emily ran up to him, calling out, "Dad." The man smiled warmly, lifting Emily into a hug. Mrs. Collins felt a wave of confusion wash over her. Why was Emily, a girl who clearly needed help, being picked up by someone who appeared so wealthy? As the man carried Emily towards the car, he glanced over and caught Mrs. Collins' eye. He gave a polite nod, acknowledging her. Mrs. Collins felt her heart race with a mix of emotions: confusion, curiosity, and a growing sense of unease. Who is this man? She wondered. And why does Emily, a girl who seems to have so little, have someone like him in her life? The mystery of Emily's situation consumed Mrs. Collins' thoughts as she left the school that day. Little did she know, the answers she sought would lead her on an unexpected journey, revealing secrets she never could have imagined. Mrs. Collins couldn't shake off the image of Emily being picked up by the mysterious man in the expensive car. The questions swirled in her mind all evening, and by the next morning, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She felt compelled to understand Emily's situation better, hoping it would help her support the young girl more effectively. During lunch break, Mrs. Collins discreetly approached Emily again. "Emily, can we talk for a moment?" she asked gently. Emily nodded, her eyes filled with curiosity and a hint of apprehension. "I saw your dad pick you up yesterday," Mrs. Collins began carefully. "He seems like a very nice man." Emily's face lit up. "Yes, he is. My dad is the best." Mrs. Collins smiled, encouraged by Emily's response. "I'm glad to hear that. I was just a little surprised because I know things have been tough for you at school. Is everything okay at home?" Emily hesitated, looking down at her hands. After a moment, she spoke softly. "Things have been hard since my mom passed away. My dad does everything he can, but it's not always enough." Mrs. Collins felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm so sorry to hear that, Emily. If there's anything I can do to help, please let me know." Emily nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you, Mrs. Collins." Later that day, Mrs. Collins decided to speak with the school counselor again, hoping to get more insight into Emily's home life. Mrs. Jenkins, the counselor, welcomed her into her office. "Mrs. Jenkins, I'm worried about Emily," Mrs. Collins began. "I know her family is struggling, but yesterday I saw a man pick her up in a very expensive car. I'm trying to understand what's going on." Mrs. Jenkins sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Emily's situation is complicated. Her father, Mr. Harrison, used to be very wealthy. He owned a successful business, but after his wife died, things started to fall apart. He lost his business and most of his wealth, and they've been trying to rebuild their lives ever since. Mrs. Collins listened intently, absorbing every word. That explains a lot. But why didn't he ask for help? It seems like he's too proud to let anyone know they're struggling. Exactly, Mrs. Jenkins agreed. He's a very proud man. He's doing everything he can to keep Emily's life as normal as possible, but it's a constant struggle. Mrs. Collins felt a deep respect for Mr. Harrison's determination and love for his daughter. She decided then and there that she would do everything in her power to support Emily and her father without undermining their dignity. The next day, Mrs. Collins called Emily to her desk again. "Emily, I'd like to invite you and your dad to a special event we're having at school this weekend. There will be lots of fun activities and some resources that might be helpful for your family. Would you be interested?" Emily's eyes brightened. "That sounds wonderful. I'll ask my dad." As Mrs. Collins watched Emily run off to class, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was determined to help this family, not just through charity, but by offering them the support and opportunities they needed to rebuild their lives. Mrs. Collins spent the next few days preparing for the special event at the school. She coordinated with other teachers and local organizations to ensure there would be plenty of resources and activities for families in need. She wanted to create an environment where Mr. Harrison and Emily could feel supported and not judged. On the day of the event, the school was buzzing with excitement. There were games, food stalls, and informational booths set up in the gymnasium. Mrs. Collins kept an eye out for Emily and her father, hoping they would come. As the event progressed, Mrs. Collins spotted Emily's familiar smile as she entered the gymnasium, holding her father's hand. Mr. Harrison looked around, his expression a mix of curiosity and hesitation. Mrs. Collins walked over to greet them. "Emily, Mr. Harrison, I'm so glad you could make it," she said warmly. "Thank you for inviting us, Mrs. Collins," Mr. Harrison replied, his tone polite but reserved. Emily immediately ran off to join her friends at one of the game stations, leaving her father to speak with Mrs. Collins. "Mr. Harrison, I want to assure you that this event is not just for those in need. It's for everyone to come together and support each other," Mrs. Collins said, hoping to ease his discomfort. Mr. Harrison nodded slowly. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Collins. It's been challenging, but I'm doing my best for Emily." "I can see that," Mrs. Collins said sincerely. "Emily is a wonderful girl, and it's clear she has a strong support system at home. If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to ask." Mr. Harrison gave a small smile. "Thank you. It's not easy accepting help, but I want what's best for Emily." As they continued talking, Mrs. Collins learned more about Mr. Harrison's struggles. He had been a successful entrepreneur, but after his wife's sudden passing, he fell into a deep depression. His business suffered, and he eventually had to close it down. Despite these challenges, he had been determined to provide a stable life for Emily. "Your resilience is admirable, Mr. Harrison. I can only imagine how difficult it's been," Mrs. Collins said, her respect for him growing. Before Mr. Harrison could respond, a loud cheer erupted from the other side of the gym. Emily had just won a game and was beaming with pride. Mr. Harrison's face softened as he watched his daughter, his love for her evident. "She's my world," he said quietly. "Everything I do is for her." Mrs. Collins felt a surge of determination. She wanted to help this family in any way she could. "Mr. Harrison, there are some organizations here today that offer support for families going through tough times. Would you be interested in learning more about them?" Mr. Harrison hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I think that would be good." Together, they visited the various booths, speaking with representatives from local charities, counseling services, and job placement agencies. Mr. Harrison seemed more at ease as he realized he wasn't alone in his struggles. As the event drew to a close, Mrs. Collins felt a sense of accomplishment. She had taken the first step in helping Emily and her father, but she knew there was still much to do. As they were about to leave, Emily ran up to Mrs. Collins and gave her a tight hug. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Collins," Emily said, her eyes shining with gratitude. "You're very welcome, Emily," Mrs. Collins replied, hugging her back. "Remember, we're always here for you." The Monday following the school event, Mrs. Collins noticed a subtle but positive change in Emily. She seemed more at ease, her eyes brighter, and her engagement in class had returned. Mrs. Collins felt a sense of relief, knowing that the event had made a difference. After school, Emily approached Mrs. Collins with a wide smile. "Mrs. Collins, guess what? My dad got a call from one of the organizations we talked to at the event. They want to help him find a new job." "That's wonderful news, Emily," Mrs. Collins exclaimed, genuinely happy for her. "How does your dad feel about it?" Emily's face lit up even more. "He's really excited. He said it's the first good news we've had in a long time." Mrs. Collins felt a warm glow of satisfaction. She had hoped the event would open doors for Mr. Harrison, and it seemed to be doing just that. She decided to check in with Mr. Harrison later in the week to see how things were progressing. On Wednesday afternoon, Mrs. Collins spotted Mr. Harrison waiting outside the school to pick up Emily. She took the opportunity to approach him. "Good afternoon, Mr. Harrison." She greeted him with a friendly smile. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Collins," he replied, his demeanor noticeably lighter than the last time they spoke. "I heard the good news from Emily. Congratulations on the job opportunity." Mr. Harrison's smile widened. "Thank you. It's still in the early stages, but I'm feeling hopeful. They have a few positions that match my skills, and they seem genuinely interested in helping me get back on my feet." "That's fantastic to hear. If there's anything more I can do to help, please don't hesitate to ask," Mrs. Collins offered. "Actually, there is something," Mr. Harrison said, his tone turning serious. "Emily told me how much you've done for her, and I can't thank you enough. I was wondering if you could help me understand some of the educational programs the school offers. I want to make sure Emily has every opportunity to succeed." "Of course, I'd be happy to help with that," Mrs. Collins said. "We can set up a meeting to go over everything in detail. How about tomorrow after school?" "That sounds perfect," Mr. Harrison agreed. The next day, Mrs. Collins and Mr. Harrison sat down together to discuss the various programs and resources available at the school. Mrs. Collins explained the tutoring services, extracurricular activities, and special academic programs that could benefit Emily. Mr. Harrison listened intently, taking notes and asking thoughtful questions. "Emily is such a bright girl," Mrs. Collins said. "With the right support, I have no doubt she will excel." Mr. Harrison nodded, a determined look in his eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes to give her the best chance." As their meeting came to an end, Mrs. Collins felt a renewed sense of hope for Emily and her father. She admired Mr. Harrison's dedication and knew that with the right support, they could overcome their challenges. In the weeks that followed, Mrs. Collins noticed a continued positive shift in Emily's demeanor. Mr. Harrison secured a job that utilized his skills and allowed him to provide more stability for his family. Emily thrived in her studies, participating eagerly in class and excelling in her assignments. One Friday afternoon, Emily approached Mrs. Collins with a handmade card. "Mrs. Collins, I made this for you," she said, handing it over. Mrs. Collins opened the card to find a heartfelt message from Emily, thanking her for all her help and support. Tears welled up in Mrs. Collins' eyes as she read the words. "Thank you, Emily. This means more to me than you know," she said, hugging the girl tightly. As she watched Emily run off to join her friends, Mrs. Collins felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had made a difference in the lives of Emily and her father, and she knew that their future was looking brighter. As the days turned into weeks, Mrs. Collins noticed that Emily's confidence continued to grow. Her active participation in class and her blossoming friendships were evidence of her increasing happiness. The positive changes in Emily's life were palpable, and Mrs. Collins felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing she had played a part in it. One afternoon, Mrs. Collins received an email from Mr. Harrison. He wanted to thank her for her ongoing support and share some exciting news. Emily had been selected for a special enrichment program at the school that focused on nurturing students' talents and academic strengths. Mrs. Collins was thrilled. This program would provide Emily with additional resources, mentorship, and opportunities to excel further. She couldn't wait to congratulate her. The next morning, as the students filed into the classroom, Mrs. Collins called Emily over to her desk. "Emily, I received a wonderful email from your dad. Congratulations on being selected for the enrichment program." Emily's face lit up with joy. "Thank you, Mrs. Collins. I'm so excited. My dad and I talked about it last night, and he said he's really proud of me. And he should be," Mrs. Collins said warmly. "You've worked very hard, and you deserve this opportunity." As the school day progressed, Mrs. Collins couldn't help but think about how far Emily had come. She remembered the shy, withdrawn girl she had first noticed and marveled at the confident, eager student Emily had become. Inspired by Emily's progress, Mrs. Collins decided to organize a parent-teacher meeting to discuss ways to foster a more supportive community within the school. She wanted to ensure that every student had the resources and encouragement they needed to thrive. At the meeting, Mrs. Collins addressed the parents and teachers gathered in the auditorium. "We have all seen the remarkable transformation in Emily's life. This was possible because of the collective support and dedication of our community. I believe we can replicate this success for other students who may be facing similar challenges." She proposed the creation of a community support group that would involve teachers, parents, and local organizations. This group would work together to identify students in need and provide them with the necessary resources and support. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Parents and teachers volunteered their time and resources, eager to contribute to this initiative. Local businesses and organizations offered to sponsor events and donate supplies. Mrs. Collins felt a surge of pride and gratitude. She knew that this community support group would make a significant difference in the lives of many students. Over the following months, the support group organized various events and programs. They held workshops on financial literacy for parents, provided free tutoring services for students, and arranged fun community-building activities. Mr. Harrison became an active member of the group, sharing his experiences and offering his time to help others. His story inspired many parents, and his resilience became a beacon of hope for those facing similar struggles. Emily continued to thrive in the enrichment program. She discovered a passion for science and began participating in science fairs and competitions. Her success stories were celebrated by the entire community, serving as a testament to the power of support and perseverance. One evening, after a particularly successful community event, Mr. Harrison approached Mrs. Collins. "I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for Emily and me. Your kindness and dedication have changed our lives." Mrs. Collins smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment. "It's been my pleasure, Mr. Harrison. Seeing Emily thrive is the greatest reward. And remember, it's not just me. It's our entire community working together that makes the difference." As they looked around the bustling auditorium filled with happy, engaged families, Mrs. Collins knew that this was just the beginning. With a strong, supportive community, there was no limit to what they could achieve together. The success of the Community Support Initiative began to spread like wildfire throughout the school and into the surrounding neighborhoods. The impact was felt far beyond Emily and her father, Mr. Harrison. Stories of transformed lives and newfound opportunities echoed through the hallways and homes of everyone involved. One morning, Mrs. Collins arrived at school to find a group of parents waiting to speak with her. They were eager to share their gratitude and stories of how the support initiative had impacted their families. Mrs. Collins listened intently, moved by their heartfelt testimonials. A mother named Jessica spoke first. "Mrs. Collins, my son Michael was struggling with his grades and his confidence. Thanks to the tutoring sessions and the mentorship program, he's now one of the top students in his class. He even talks about going to college one day." Another parent, Mr. Sanchez, added, "My daughter Maria used to be very shy and withdrawn. The community events have helped her make friends and come out of her shell. She's now part of the school's drama club and loves performing." Mrs. Collins felt a deep sense of pride and fulfillment. It was clear that the initiative was making a real difference, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond the school walls. As the weeks went by, the community support group continued to grow. More parents, teachers, and local organizations joined the cause, bringing fresh ideas and resources. They organized a series of workshops on mental health, career planning, and financial management, ensuring that families had access to a wide range of support. One afternoon, Emily came to Mrs. Collins with an idea. "Mrs. Collins, I was thinking, what if we started a peer mentoring program? Older students could help younger ones with their studies and offer support. I think it could make a big difference." Mrs. Collins was impressed by Emily's initiative. "That's a wonderful idea, Emily. Let's present it at the next community meeting and see how we can get it started." At the next meeting, Emily presented her idea to the group. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Plans were quickly put into place to launch the peer mentoring program, with Emily taking a leading role in organizing and coordinating the effort. The program kicked off with a lot of enthusiasm. Older students were paired with younger ones based on their strengths and needs. The mentors provided academic support, but more importantly, they offered friendship and guidance. It wasn't long before the positive effects of the program became evident. One evening, Mrs. Collins received a call from Mr. Harrison. "Mrs. Collins, I wanted to thank you again. Emily has really found her place with the peer mentoring program. She's so passionate about helping others, and it's been incredible to see her grow." "I'm so glad to hear that, Mr. Harrison," Mrs. Collins replied. "Emily has always had a kind heart. This program is a testament to her character and her desire to give back." As the school year progressed, the community support initiative continued to flourish. The sense of camaraderie and cooperation among students, parents, and teachers created a nurturing environment where everyone felt valued and supported. Mrs. Collins couldn't help but reflect on how it all began, with a simple act of kindness towards a struggling student. That single gesture had sparked a chain reaction, transforming not only Emily's life, but also the lives of countless others in their community. One day, as Mrs. Collins was tidying up her classroom, Emily walked in with a bright smile. "Mrs. Collins, guess what? I've been nominated for a Community Service Award. They said it's because of the peer mentoring program and all the work we've been doing." Mrs. Collins beamed with pride. "Emily, that's amazing. You truly deserve it. Your dedication and hard work have made such a difference." Emily hugged Mrs. Collins tightly. "Thank you for believing in me and for all your support. I couldn't have done it without you." As Mrs. Collins watched Emily leave the classroom, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The ripple effect of kindness and support had created a powerful wave of change, one that would continue to grow and inspire others for years to come. As the school year moved forward, the Community Support Initiative faced its first significant challenge. A sudden economic downturn affected many families, including some of the key contributors to the support group. Job losses and financial strain became prevalent, and the community's morale took a hit. Mrs. Collins noticed the change almost immediately. Attendance at meetings dwindled, and some parents expressed concerns about their ability to continue participating in the initiative. She knew that the community needed to pull together now more than ever, but she also understood the pressures they were facing. One evening, Mrs. Collins called an emergency meeting of the community support group. She needed to address the situation head-on and find a way to keep their momentum going despite the difficulties. As parents and teachers gathered in the school's auditorium, the atmosphere was heavy with uncertainty. Mrs. Collins stepped up to the podium, her heart pounding with determination. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began. "I know these are challenging times for many of us. The economic downturn has hit our community hard, and it's understandable that some of us are feeling overwhelmed. But I believe that now, more than ever, we need to support each other. Our initiative has made a real difference in the lives of our students and families, and we cannot let these challenges stop us." She paused, looking out at the worried faces in the crowd. "I have an idea that I think could help us continue our work without placing additional financial burdens on anyone. We can focus on leveraging our time, skills, and resources in ways that don't cost money but still provide immense value. For instance, those of us who have time can offer free tutoring sessions, organize community events using donated supplies, or even create a time bank system where we exchange services with each other." Mr. Harrison, sitting in the front row, raised his hand. "Mrs. Collins, I think that's a fantastic idea. I can offer my skills in home repair and maintenance to anyone who needs it. It won't cost me anything but time, and I know it could help someone else." A murmur of agreement spread through the auditorium. Other parents and teachers began to share their ideas and volunteer their skills. Jessica, the mother who had previously spoken about her son Michael, offered to provide free babysitting services for parents who needed time to attend job interviews or training sessions. Mr. Sanchez, who had shared about his daughter Maria, offered to run drama workshops for students to help them build confidence and social skills. With renewed energy and a sense of purpose, the community support group reorganized itself to adapt to the new circumstances. The time bank system took off, with families exchanging services and support in a way that strengthened their bonds without financial strain. The school's sense of unity and resilience grew stronger each day. Emily, who had been deeply involved in the peer mentoring program, noticed the changes too. She saw how the mentors and mints supported each other not just academically but emotionally, helping to lift spirits during tough times. Inspired by the community's response, Emily decided to take her involvement a step further. One afternoon, Emily approached Mrs. Collins with a proposal. "Mrs. Collins, I think we should organize a community talent show. It would be a fun event that could bring everyone together, and it wouldn't cost much to put on. Plus, it would give people something positive to focus on." Mrs. Collins loved the idea. "Emily, that's brilliant. Let's start planning it right away." The next few weeks were filled with excitement as students, parents, and teachers prepared for the talent show. They transformed the school gymnasium into a festive venue with donated decorations and makeshift stage props. The entire community pitched in, and the event became a beacon of hope and joy amid the challenges they were facing. The night of the talent show arrived, and the gymnasium was filled with laughter, applause, and the vibrant energy of a community united. Students showcased their talents in singing, dancing, acting, and more. Emily herself performed a heartfelt song, dedicating it to the community that had supported her and her father through thick and thin. As the night drew to a close, Mrs. Collins took the stage to address the audience. "Tonight, we have seen the incredible power of community. Despite the challenges we've faced, we've come together to support each other in every way we can. This is what makes our community special, and this is what will see us through any hardship." Looking out at the smiling faces, Mrs. Collins felt an overwhelming sense of pride and gratitude. The challenges they had faced only served to strengthen their resolve and deepen their connections. The morning after the talent show, the school was buzzing with excitement. The event had been a huge success, and the positive energy was palpable. Students, parents, and teachers were still talking about the performances, and the sense of community had never been stronger. Mrs. Collins arrived at her classroom early, reflecting on the journey they had all taken together. The challenges they faced had not only been overcome, but had also served to unite them even more tightly. She felt a renewed sense of purpose and was eager to continue fostering this environment of support and growth. During morning announcements, the principal, Mr. Thompson, congratulated everyone on the success of the talent show. "I am incredibly proud of our students, parents, and teachers for coming together and making last night such a memorable event. Our community support initiative has shown what we can achieve when we work together, and I look forward to continuing this journey with all of you." After the announcements, Emily approached Mrs. Collins with a big smile. "Mrs. Collins, I have another idea. What if we started a community garden? We could grow fresh vegetables and herbs, and it would be a great way to bring everyone together. Plus, it would help some families with food." Mrs. Collins beamed at Emily. "That's a wonderful idea, Emily. Let's discuss it with the community support group and see how we can get started." At the next community meeting, Emily presented her idea for the garden. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and several parents and teachers volunteered to help. They planned to use a vacant lot next to the school, and with donations of seeds, tools, and supplies, they began transforming the space into a thriving garden. The project quickly became a symbol of the community's resilience and cooperation. Families worked side by side, planting, weeding, and watering the garden. Students learned about sustainability and healthy eating, and the fresh produce was shared among those in need. One day, while working in the garden, Mrs. Collins noticed a new student observing from the sidelines. She approached the young girl, who looked shy and uncertain. "Hello there. I'm Mrs. Collins. Would you like to join us?" The girl hesitated before nodding. "My name is Lily. We just moved here, and I don't really know anyone yet." Mrs. Collins smiled warmly. "Welcome, Lily. We're glad to have you here. Let me introduce you to Emily and some of the other students." Emily quickly took Lily under her wing, showing her how to plant seeds and explaining the different types of vegetables they were growing. Lily's initial shyness began to fade as she felt the warmth and acceptance of the community. As the weeks went by, the garden flourished, and so did the sense of unity within the school. The produce was used in the school cafeteria, and students took pride in knowing they had contributed to their own meals. The garden also became a peaceful space where students could relax, study, and enjoy nature. Inspired by the success of the garden, the community support group began brainstorming other projects. They started a recycling program, organized cleanup days in the neighborhood, and even set up a scholarship fund for graduating students who had been particularly active in community service. Mr. Harrison played a significant role in many of these initiatives, offering his time and skills wherever they were needed. He often spoke at community meetings, sharing his story and encouraging others to get involved. His journey from hardship to hope inspired many, and his resilience became a cornerstone of the community's spirit. One evening, as the sun set over the garden, Mrs. Collins, Emily, and Mr. Harrison stood together, admiring the fruits of their labor. "This garden is more than just plants," Mr. Harrison said thoughtfully. "It's a testament to what we can achieve when we support each other. It's a symbol of hope and resilience." Emily nodded. "I never imagined that a small act of kindness could lead to all of this. It shows that we can make a big difference, no matter how small our actions might seem." Mrs. Collins felt a deep sense of pride. "This is just the beginning. Our community has shown incredible strength and compassion. Together, we can face any challenge and create a bright future for all of us." As they stood there, the garden bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, Mrs. Collins knew that their journey was far from over. With a united community, there was no limit to what they could achieve. The future was indeed bright, and it was theirs to shape, one act of kindness at a time. The community garden became the heart of the school, a place where everyone could gather, learn, and grow together. But the garden was just the beginning. Inspired by their success, the community support group began exploring new opportunities to expand their impact and continue fostering a sense of unity and resilience. Mrs. Collins called a meeting to discuss the next steps. Parents, teachers, and students filled the school's auditorium, buzzing with excitement about what they could achieve next. "Thank you all for coming," Mrs. Collins began. "Our garden has been a tremendous success, and it's shown us what we can accomplish when we work together. But I believe we can do even more. Let's brainstorm some new ideas to continue supporting our community." Emily raised her hand eagerly. "What if we start a community kitchen? We could use some of the produce from the garden to prepare meals for families in need. It could also be a place for people to learn how to cook healthy meals and share recipes." The room erupted in applause. The idea resonated with everyone, and plans for the community kitchen quickly took shape. Volunteers offered to donate kitchen equipment,